to preparing for a successful upgrade. I'm Evan Christensen. I'm with Master Control out of Salt Lake. I manage the team that does most of the upgrades. I also manage the technical support team out of our UK office as well. And I've been with Master Control about 11 and a half years now, so just a little bit. So the things we're going to try to talk about today is understanding the hardware and software readiness for version 11. A lot of changes with version 11 as compared to previous versions. Who is on version 11 right now? Anybody? Sort of? Sort of. What company are you with?
From Period.
Oh, Period Reseller, yeah. Yeah, sort of. Yeah. Anybody else? Did you read it? Oh, okay. All right, so then we're going to look at what the life cycle looks like for version 11 as well. So in the past, we've come out with version 10, and then we've had 10.1, and then 10.1.1, and 10.1.2, 10.1.3, little minor fixes, things like that. Then we'll also talk about how to plan and execute a successful upgrade, and then what keeping current and what the validation efforts look like for version 11, because it's a little bit different. We're moving to, in version 11, we've moved to what's called a frequent release. A lot of companies use frequent release, Google, Firefox, Chrome, other things like that, where you always get enhancements in the product as it moves along to help reduce your validation efforts. So that's kind of the direction that we've gone. So this is what I tell all my employees. You know, I have a guy named Dan that helped me in the US with this. So this was a joke with Dan. It's a lot more funny when he's here, a lot less funny when he's not. So I thought about changing it to Peter, because now it's time to roll out Peter version 11. You like that? Yeah, I thought you might. So as you look at the hardware software recommendations for version 11, one of the things that we have done, and we did this in version 10, but even more so and a little more important in version 11, is the hardware specs as it relates to the number of end users that you'll have in the system. So we're going to pull up the specs in a minute. That was even harder to read in just red, believe it or not. So I tried to find the best way to make it legible. But you can obviously read the hardware software requirements or recommendations on our website, but we'll go over them at a high level in just a minute. What we've also done is we identified the software compatibility for the different versions of Master Control. So we'll be going over a little bit of that. What you can expect when you do upgrade to version 11 is that whomever is going to be doing that will be going over the hardware of your servers prior to the upgrade to make sure that everything's going to happen. So I'm just going to click on this link right here. And hopefully this will open up. And you can't read it at all because it's too small. 1 second. So with version 11.2, we've got things kind of split out, a little table of contents there. See if you can get this to a point where you can actually see it. So from a configuration standpoint, we've got a couple of different things that we've talked about. How many of you have your Master Control externally available? So available to users outside of your network? No one. Do you want to? Because you can do that. What we've done with version 11 is we've changed a bit, or actually we've changed a lot of the way that the architecture functions with version 11. So we now use reverse proxy. I don't know why it wants to find another place when I hear it on stuff. But so right here, we'll go old school on this, so it stops doing that. So right here, there's a reverse proxy for anybody that wants to put a server in a DMZ. That would allow you to have a firewall access from a client outside of your internal network. Now you can remove this step, and it's not required by any means. So you can have just internal your network, or your user base internal to your network, similar to how I guess most of you have it set up currently. What you can also do is put in a DMZ, which would, or put a reverse proxy in your DMZ, which will allow any external users to connect as well to your master control. From a configuration standpoint, as most of you, or many of you may already have a 3-server setup. So you've got your production web server, you've got your database server, and then you've got a publishing server. Well, with version 11, we've introduced what's called an enterprise management server. And what it is, it's an application that allows us to manage components of master control like resources. So for example, all of your files are contained in what we call the EFP. And the EFP can get pretty big. So with the EMS, what we've done is we've said, all right, let's make that a resource that we can then tie to different things. So what we've done, or what we recommend, is we create what are called nodes. And as we talk a little bit more about this, hopefully it will make a little bit more sense. So it's hard to read right here, but when you get your own copy of the hardware software, which you can download from our website, or I can give you a copy, or we can go print one somewhere and I can go over it. But there's different nodes. So you have your application, your presentation, your licensing, your EFP, your data, which ties back to your database server. So from a server's perspective, you're really not adding any more servers or any less servers. We're just changing the way you interact with them. So as you may or may not know, in version 10 and previous, we've used IIS as the web delivery system for the application, and we've used Blue Dragon. That sound familiar to anybody? That's what we use to do our translation for the code itself. So with version 11, we've changed that up a bit, so we no longer require IIS. We don't use Blue Dragon anymore. We use a different tool called Rilo, and many of you have heard of Apache Tomcat before. Raise your hand if you have. Yes? Good. All right. So that's what we use for web delivery. So from that perspective, it's very similar to how you've seen it in the past, right? So from an end user perspective, it'll look exactly the same. You'll still hit a URL, go to the same master control. From a technology standpoint, it's much different. There's a lot of different back-end components. Like I mentioned, the EMS, all of these services configured in these nodes are done in the EMS. So you create a node, and then you create services underneath it. It's all done through the installation procedure, so you don't actually have to do anything. We'll take care of it for you. But just from an architecture standpoint and how the system's set up. Now, why did we do that? Why did we go to an EMS model? No one? Anybody? Throw an answer out there?
Easier to manage.
Easier to manage. It's also, not only is it easier to manage, but it also creates more scalability. So for example, if you go from, say, 5 users to 500 users, you're going to have to increase the amount of hardware that you have dedicated to master control. Even maybe the number of servers you have dedicated. So you can take these nodes and you can say, all right, I'm going to create your primary web server, then you could have as many secondary or tertiary or whatever fourth is, 4, 5, 6, different kind of web servers where you might have 4 to 5 additional nodes. Those all would then have additional presentation services on them. So it gives you the opportunity to use load balancing, other options as you get bigger. Actelion is a good one because they're quite large. They could fall into that as we look into doing this. Most of what we keep usually the EMS on the PDF server now. So because the EMS is kind of a lightweight utility, we say, all right, let's put that on your lightweight publishing server. Your publishing server still does the same work it always has done. Your database server does the same work it's always done, but everything's tied together now through EMS and connections that are made within the application. So it's all very, I would show it to you, but in my opinion, it's not very pretty. We like to keep things pretty, right? Yes?
I didn't quite understand that. regarding the external users. So, I mean, in terms of protection and security, if they can access the system without the VPN?
They can if you allow it. So just like with any other external system, you still have to open up firewall ports, do some configuration with the ports that you want the information to go over, set up an external website, get all of the routing set up for that. But you can set it up externally because we do now allow for a reverse proxy to be able to be externally available.
In terms of the validation of an open system, it's an open system. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we recommend also that you use an SSL and other security measures if you want to make your system externally available. But it's entirely possible to do it that way. Any other questions on that? External availability? No? Nothing? Okay. Just one other thing I wanted to show you on this, which, see how well I can work the mouse backwards? Obviously super well. So as we talked a little bit about the, so for example, we talked about the hardware software requirements in terms of number of users per hardware, I guess you could say. So for example, our database server, if you have less than 50 users, this is our recommended configuration for your hardware. If you have somewhere between 500 to 200, 200 to 500, and then between 500 and 1,000 and greater than 1,000 users. So this is what we're looking at. There's other suggestions that we have at the bottom. For example, if you have over 1,000 users, I'd probably recommend going with, say, a Fusion IO card or something that's going to allow high throughput to your server. Yes?
When you're talking about users, are you talking about concurrent users, or are you talking about actual users?
We are talking about concurrent users. So, and when you say actual users, you mean people that can use the software versus people that are using the software, right? Yeah, no, we're talking about concurrent users here. Because if you could have 5,000 users but only 50 licenses, then only 50 people are going to be able to use the system at any one time.
Is there a special process that consumes much CPU time? So to keep focus on it?
Yes. So, especially when we start talking about the database consumption in particular, database is probably, because everything's stored in the database, that's probably where I'd say that's where you dedicate most of your hardware from a CPU and memory perspective. And that's where your throughput is going to be very important from a database perspective. So if you start seeing bad performance, it might be database related. Some of the things that we've seen from people that go virtual, how many of you are using virtual servers now? And it's very common practice, and there's nothing, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, there's certainly not. The only issues that we've seen with virtual servers is if you use any kind of resource pooling, sometimes those can be put into the wrong tier. So instead of being a tier 1 application, they become a tier 2 application, and other tier 1 applications steal their resources and create some problems there. Other than that, we haven't really seen any problems with virtualization at all or anything like that. So all of that's working very well from that perspective. But you'll see all of our different hardware software requirements have these recommendations. Yes?
Is there an opportunity to have a stress test for this?
Yeah, we do offer load testing services. They can be done remotely. So we can get onto your site and we can see how that is. We do a fair amount of load testing internally, obviously, as we make these recommendations. That's where these come from as internal load testing, as we put in thousands of users or hundreds of users. Yeah.
Is it possible also to have such scripting available for
yes.
client sides?
Yeah, for client sides as well. Yeah, so we do our internal testing, but you can also purchase services to do on-site or remote load testing as well on your own hardware and things like that. All right. Any questions on hardware, software? Just where can I get my hands on it, that kind of thing? All right. So it's on the customer website, but you can also get it other places. Now, for example, I'm just gonna scroll down to our PDF server here. So you can see here, because PDF is still just a linear process, even with the upgrades to AdLib that we've got. I did want to point out that we also do a lot of third-party testing for what's compatible with which version. So for example, and I know this is hard to read, but it's a lot easier on a different copy or a different screen. Just the different versions of Silverlight and .NET. If you're going to publish any PDF files, there's some changes with the way that like DWG files or SolidWorks or other drawing type files. Does anybody publish any of those here today? No? Sometimes? So there's an add-on to AdLib called eCAD, which is an additional purchase if you decide to move to version 11. They no longer support the, we were able to use AutoView before, but they no longer support that in later versions of AdLib. So there's some updates that have happened there. So there's an eCAD module that's an add-on that will allow you to do some of the DWG files and SolidWorks drawings, things like that. Also talks about anybody that's using the Intralink or any kind of other stuff, but that's not very common, so I won't spend a lot of time with that. But anyway, the point being, anything else that needs to be discussed is usually in this hardware software, and obviously our tech support is ready and available to answer any questions that you might have. Any questions on hardware software requirements? Okay. Now, when we start talking about readiness, I'm going to go ahead and close this and restart the presentation. Hopefully things will go just really smoothly. Put this back in. All right. So if you're looking at doing a more in-depth architecture review, so your real question is, okay, I've got my servers, I know what they need to be, but what about my internal networking? What about wide area connections? What about, you know, I've got a site in Germany, I've got a site in Norway, I've got a site in France. How am I, you know, how am I going to get those connected? Or maybe you already have those connected, but what's the throughput? What does that look like? We do offer a full architecture review, which is a billable service. You can purchase that through your salesperson, where we have one of our technical experts look at, work with your IT team, work with your networking folks to look at how that all ties together and come up with some recommendations on hardware, recommendations on network, things like that. So if you're interested, that is available. Excuse me. So software lifecycle for version 11. In the past, we've tried to do P1 critical fixes every 2 months for your software to reduce the amount of validation that has to be done. So if you're on 10.1, you can do minor upgrades, which make it a lot quicker for you to do requalification on P1 critical fixes. So with the frequent release, we've tried to reduce still the cost and effort to upgrade by introducing smaller groups of enhancements into version 11. So version 11 came out with X number of enhancements, 11.1 is slightly more than that. So there is some revalidation, but it's a smaller amount because the number of enhancements is smaller. So as we do that and as we go throughout the 11 life cycle, that's what we're seeing is a smaller number of enhancements each release of version 11, but they're still in there. So this is available to all clients, whether you're in our hosted environment or whether you're on a premise environment as well. They're easily updatable. We have we're kind of turning into a Microsoft where we have Patch Wednesdays now. So you can update your EMS system and your master control system on Wednesdays, which is where we've released our new patches. We are releasing a new product about every 3 months. Eventually we'd like to get that a little shorter, but we're getting ready to release 11.3 in June. That's the target. see how close we get to that. We did just release 11.2, which is what we're calling our first pinnable release. So as we've seen in previous versions of Master Control with 11.1 or 10.1, where you had other revisions where, and it was funny, I'm just going to detract for 1 second, but when they released 10.1, I said, do you think we'll ever get to a 10.1.10? Because I think that would be an awesome release. And they're like, oh no, we'll never get there. Yeah, we just are releasing 10.1.13. So I just thought, we got not only past 10, to 10, but also past it. So I thought it'd be fun just to say 10.1.10. They laughed at me when I said it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just noticed that with the 11, also saw at a certain point that was on the build number.
Yes.
In between. So there are more some bug fixes for?
Yeah, they're still doing some bug fixes as well through the Patch Wednesdays. So those are the P1 critical fixes, as opposed to introducing new enhancements into those particular versions.
So with the first you still can have some build number?
Yeah, there is some build number variation in those, yeah.
How much effort, if you compare to, let's say, if you are building up new features, how much effort of the time spent on building new features is spent on testing? Because my fear is in a lot of companies are doing more frequent releases because the market puts a demand on it. But what you see a lot is that testing becomes no longer a vendor thing, but becomes an end user thing, and resulting in more hot fixes. But especially with the validated system, it's tough to always implement.
It's difficult. So how we've tried to address that is we continue to do the ATOQ testing and other testing as we continue to release new product as well to try to alleviate the amount of testing that needs to be done by the end user. So that's, while some of the frequent release product is targeted that way, that's not how ours has been targeted. Ours is still in the, let's make it easier for the end user to do the upgrades versus putting the onus on you. Now granted, you still have to read the release notes to try to determine what the risk is on an upgrade based on the new enhancements that are going into it. So there's still some risk assessment that needs to go on there prior to upgrading to a different release, but we try to minimize that as much as possible. Any other questions on that? Okay. So, keep calm, keep avoiding production. So a couple more benefits to the frequent release. Obviously, our purpose is to deliver real value to customers faster. Matt, in his plenary session this morning, had you all separate into teams to talk about which enhancements you all wanted to see in the product first, right? So that's our goal, is to try to get those into this product faster. So we have some release boards that talk about which enhancements are in which version and when they're coming out. How many of you would like to get rid of using Java, the dependency on Java? Yeah, I know, like both hands up in the air all the way. That's what I'm saying. I can't tell you. I think I was in Master Control like 2 years, and I said we've got to stop using Java. And they started talking about using HTML for route builder and for some other things. So they finally got to where now you can view the organizer in HTML, but you have to edit it still in Java. So I've heard 11.4 the same. Don't hold me to it. But sure would be great, right? Again, like we talked about, lighter validation for end users to be able to upgrade to later versions of Master Control. It allows us to quickly adapt to market changes. The other thing is improved release documentation. And our main goal is to increase the quality of the software and also its reliability. With version 11 came a lot of platform changes. It introduced some, I don't want to say it's made the software less stable, but anytime you make big changes, there's some inherent risk with those kinds of things. So we're spending a lot of time working on making the product more stable, more scalable as we continue to move forward. So it's a needed step, and it's been a long time coming. For those of you who have been around a long time, you've known we've talked about version 11 for a long, long time. So version 10 was awesome. Version 11 also awesome. So I just really like this validation chart too. I don't really talk a lot about validation, but I like that they both think that neither of them can do anything right. I'm sure that's how validation seems sometimes. So if you're planning an upgrade, how many of you would like to try version 11? Okay. Not as many. I was hoping everybody would raise their hand. Or those that didn't, you wanted to raise your hand, you just couldn't muster that. I got it. I'm right with you. All right, so there's a couple easy things. So be prepared is probably the easiest thing. We'll do a hardware-software call with you guys beforehand to make sure that the hardware is ready to go for this. Now, what we've recommended for people that do want to try version 11 is to get either some test servers or something apart from what they have currently ready. Because it doesn't require IAS, it doesn't require a lot of things. There's some pieces, like your database server, that we can, I guess you could say, reuse, or we can use a test database on your existing database server, things like that. But because of the way the EMS functions and the upgrade to AdLib, we can do temporary licenses for AdLib, we can do different things like that. But the AdLib and the web server can get them to work on the same servers, but it's kind of dangerous. I wouldn't say dangerous. The risk is a little higher, because risk is a good quality word, right? The risk is a little higher, and it requires additional resources. Because if you're still running your version 10 stuff on IIS and Blue Dragon, you can put Apache Tomcat and Rilo on the same machine, but it's going to use a whole separate set of resources here and then here.
You can find the installation log files itself.
What's that?
The installation log files are they logged? The installation process itself?
That's a good question. I'm not. Are they locked? You mean like? What do you mean locked?
In case of this will be done, this will be done, this will be done.
Yeah, they are locked that way. So it's very. I guess you could say once you start an installation, if it doesn't complete successfully, it doesn't roll back. Is that?
But presented in a log file, not on the screen.
Right. Yes.
Is it?
It is logged. Logged or logged? You said logged, right? Yeah. It is logged during the installation. And the installation is done, whereas some of you, and especially you guys from Hyperion, have some good experience doing the installation. Version 10 was very compartmentalized, right? So you'd install one piece, and then you install another piece. Version 11 is you install all of it all at once. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, when you have three servers, you have the database server and the AdLib server and then the IIS server. You only need to use the IIS server, that should be a test server, or should everything?
I would recommend everything. Well, maybe not the database, but probably a separate AdLib server and a separate web server. So if, for example, you have, let's say that right now you have production on its own web server, and you have a shared PDF server and a shared database, and then maybe a separate test dev web server, so you've got 4 servers. I would introduce maybe a 5th and a 6th server for a test web and a test publishing. Once you do that, you could decommission your test web server if the test is going well, and then kind of, I guess you could say, shuffle servers a little bit. You don't have to do that. You can increase resources and just install right on top of it, but it's a little bit more, I don't want to say tricky, but it introduces a little bit more risk. So it's a little easier just to introduce a new environment. Plus, how many of you are running older than version 10 of Master Control? One, just you. So just you. Most of the time, or what we've seen a lot of the times as well, is customers haven't upgraded their hardware in a little while because it's been a long time since we've had a new release of Master Control. So now is also a good time to introduce new hardware or updated hardware if there hasn't been much. But that usually only applies to people that are on version 9 or before. Version 10 is usually okay. But again, it comes back to how many users do you have accessing the system and how many do you want to have accessing the system. If you're planning growth, it's a good time to increase as well. All right, as far as getting other things and making the actual upgrade go smoothly, Downloading the application before the appointment is always a good idea. It's about a gig download, so it can take some time. And if we do that during the appointment, it can take that amount of time out of what we could be doing for the install. Hardware, software recommendations, we've already talked about those. You've already reviewed them, but if your IT staff needs to review them, your sysadmin needs to review them. Also, completing any IQ pre-approvals. The IQ for version 11 is shorter, I guess you could say. It's shorter. We've taken out a separate IQ for the PDF server, so it's just the web server and the database server, and that's all the IQs there are for version 11. So it's kind of nice. We've introduced a lot more screenshots, and we tried to capture a lot more things, but because the installation is more complete, I guess you could say, there's a lot less things to take pictures of, and so we didn't need to have that big of an IQ. If your IT staff's prepared for the appointment, also if the sysadmin's available for passwords, things like that during an upgrade. And then obviously people that are available for any testing after the upgrade. One of the things that I will say that we've seen is we've seen some issues with forms as we upgrade to version 11. So in previous versions we've seen a lot of, I guess you could say, I'm trying to think of the best word, low risk with upgrading process forms. With version 11 we've seen a little bit more of an increase in some of the risk on that, so we just want to make sure that people are allowing enough time to test their PDF forms if you're using PDF forms, or HTML forms if you're using HTML forms, to make sure that those come across from version 10 or version 9. I would say the biggest dangers are version 8 and prior as you upgrade to version 11. We've seen some hard coding inside of forms, which doesn't work as well in version 11 because we've gone a lot more dynamic on a lot of things. But if your forms are within a year to 2 to 3 years old, they're usually okay because they're mostly dynamic enough to handle the upgrade. Does that make sense? Just something to throw out there as we think about upgrades. It's a risk that needs to be identified. Yes?
If we have a customized process form, is it possible to test it in a low-evidence environment before we go?
Yes. Nope, you have to go straight to production. No. Yeah, you can definitely test it ahead of time.
So before we decide to do it, so we can test it.
Right. Well, and that's what your test environments are for, right? So there's a certain amount that you kind of have to get ready for to be able to do that. But then once you've got a test environment, you can start figuring out what the actual workload is on that. And most of the time it's going to be very small, if any, right? There have been a few occasions. We had one customer went from version 7 to version 11. How many of you are familiar with the convenience store 7-Eleven? Yeah, in the States. I don't know if they have it out here, but I don't think so. But I would say the 7 to 11 was non-convenient for them. That's a joke on it. Terrible joke, sorry. This is bad. But you know where I'm going from, right? Alright. So reasons why I upgrade software, because you want the latest version is this very small, because you want to get rid of the reminder, correct? Luckily you don't get a reminder with master control to upgrade, so this is not applicable, but it's a good reason, right? Alright. So as far as keeping current, the FDA does not mandate a development methodology. So when we switched over to rapid release versus how we had been doing releases in the past, we felt like that fell well within the FDA principles for software validation, as it does not recommend any specific lifecycle model or specific technique or method. So that's part of our rationale for moving to a rapid release cycle. Any questions on rapid release, preparing, anything like that? As we start looking at the upcoming release cycle for version 11 and version 10, which we should have added a 10.113, but it's right there, or it will be, as soon as it releases. Next week is the target. Don't hold me to that. So I have no control. You can see here we'll have some pinnable releases. 11.2 is our first pinnable release. That means that's the one we're going to definitely get the P1 critical fixes for as we start rolling that out. And then 11.6 is our next pinnable release. That will be, anybody want to do the math on that? 11.2 to 11.6 is 4 releases every 3 months next year. Yeah, so 11.6 will be next year. And that'll be our second pinnable release, but 11.2 is our first. Any questions on that? Life cycle, timelines? Makes sense, a lot of sense, clear like mud? Yeah, all right. Any questions, like why I have a picture of an engine being worked on? If I had that question, I don't know. Any other discussion points you want to talk about as far as upgrading is concerned? Any gotchas you want to talk about, anything like that? Discussions? Anybody can think of a better 7-Eleven joke than I can?
I have one question.
Yeah.
Because we didn't execute an upgrade process.
Yeah.
This time. I saw in 11 that the workflows for documents model works different. So back types which you don't have. So you cannot have something flexible, or you can pinpoint one or multiple routes to a different car type. But how does that handle in because previous versions, 10 and before, they don't have it?
That is a great question.
How does that work? If you have the configuration, is that or I have an open link to the different card, or I have one workflow pinpoint to one different card, and then I go upgrade to 11. How does that?
So because of some of the functionality in version 11, if you want to use some of that or employ the functionality that we've allowed in version 11, some reconfiguration is needed at the time of installation or after installation.
And what is that already because the workflows are there?
They should remain.
They should remain.
Did you notice that they did not remain?
No. Still do the test that one.
Okay. Yeah, because as far as I'm aware, anything that was the testing that I've done with different customers, I haven't seen any problems with anything that was configured as far as it not being configured any longer. It's still configured the same way, but it does allow for some additional configuration. And that's true with most major version upgrades as we move forward, is a lot of the same configuration remains, but it does allow for some different configuration. If you have specific questions on configuration that can be done afterwards, you can contact professional services or technical support. They can help you out with that.
It's good to know that you have all these manual releases coming and which times they come. It would be even better to know what's coming. I mean, have a really clear overview on when is Java going to be away. You have to wait for 10.4, 10.5.
That would be a great thing to be able to get ahead of time. Now, as you know, and as I know, the release notes are what drive or what dictate what is in the current release, right? And we usually don't get those until it's released.
Yeah, exactly.
But it would be a great enhancement request to request something for product management that would say this is what we're looking at, or these are the things that are in this release because we've already finished them, versus waiting till those release notes come out. I'll bring that feedback to them so that we can get some of that hopefully ahead of time. But that's a great suggestion.
The release notes to 11.3 is already ready.
No, not yet.
Oh, it's not.
Oh, they are. Never mind. They're already out. So
Yeah, but that's
good suggestion. Apparently we've already done it.
I would like to know further. I would like to know at the end of the year.
Oh, I think at the end of the year. So 11.4, 11.5.
Yeah.
So at Master Control, we have called the board of release. So we have several different monitors that show us what is in which release and when it's done. But you can't see that unless you come visit. Come visit.
Okay.
We'll take you over
Good
there
suggestion.
all the time. Yeah.
I've
So-
seen it, it's really impressive.
Okay, so you're saying the 11.3 is already out. And that makes sense because they've already frozen the code and they're in the validation time I'll double check. Any other questions?
Maybe not, it's not really in here, but can you reopen forms when they're completed in the new version?
Can you reopen forms, so like relaunch them on a route?
No, get them opened up again because you want to send them back. Let's say you have completed those form. So
Not that I'm aware of. I will double check, but I don't think so. Like push it back to draft and then relaunch it.
Yeah. No, so you can go back and why else you said like the function by the way. Not for the
I'll double check. I don't think so, but I'll find out. Anything else? Because we're going to be done early if you don't have any other questions. Not a huge fan of finishing early. I mean, because then lunch is still at noon. We're still like 25 minutes away from that.
You have specific issues with, you mentioned forms.
Yes.
Do you have specific examples on that?
Yes, I have some very specific.
We have now PDF forms, we have HTML forms, version of any four different up through the last 5 years.
So there's a couple of things that we've seen, both with PDF forms and with HTML forms. Specifically, some of the things that we've seen are, well, we had some really older HTML forms that had some hard-coded file locations. So over the years, we've done a much better job at making the HTML paths inside the forms more dynamic. And so storing like files of, how many of you use file libraries in version 10 for your process forms? Just you. So there's a way in Master Control you can add files like JavaScript files into your process library, and that's in version 11 as well. But it used to be, back in the old days, or when we started doing HTML forms, we would keep that in a particular directory inside the code. So if your form is pointing to that directory inside the code and then you upgrade and we don't grab that file directory, it won't be there. And then your forms could malfunction because that file directory is not there. So then you have to recode the forms to point to a different directory. It's not difficult per se, but it does cause some problems when you try to launch a form and then something doesn't work, like the calendar or something more significant. Or like an image, if your company logo is in the same static location and your form says, go to this location on the server, but then you change servers and it's not there. So things like that are some of the things that we've seen where some items were statically programmed into the form. A URLs is another one. So if you launch a form within a form, but for some reason you change servers and the URL changes, that's another one we've seen where you can't then launch a form within a form because URL was statically coded to be X server and now it's Y server and it's just not working. So those are the two probably most common ones we've seen. We've seen some other minor things where those are probably the two biggest things that created problems for customers. It took a little while to figure out what was going on with the servers because the coding was, I guess you could say, so old that we had a hard time locating where the issue was.
Is this something you built into your upgrade of 11.3 that they would take care of it, or do you have to?
Well, so what we do is we work with customers that have those kinds of issues to get their forms working in version 11. Where their forms that Master Control, either Master Control has created the form as a custom process, or it's a solutions package or something like that. If they're customer created, we can point you in the right direction, but then it's kind of one of those things where you can either then contract our TFS group to help you work on it, or we can help you identify where the issue is, and then somebody in your organization can also work on it as well. Yes?
Going back to the software side, to the specifications, I saw for Java and for the Internet Explorer that you will stick on IE9 to maybe to 10. I don't know exactly what is about 11, and on the Java stack it's the same situation.
With version 11, we do support Internet Explorer 11, and with Java it's 1.8, up to 1.8, because I think they're...
So maybe it's an implementation bug,
Could be. It's also, when we originally released version 11.0, Well, we did have support for IE 11 and Java 8 at that time as well. But I know, if, like, for example, the initial release of version 11, we didn't validate on Server 2012 R2 for PDF, but we have now. So with 11.2, we have that validated, even though it would work with version 11 to do it. We didn't actually validate it, but we have now. So there's just some updates. I don't know which version you're looking at. The one that was up here was hard to see. Okay. You're still not seeing IE 11? Because you should be seeing it in there.
There's also something dragon.
With which?
With the blue dragon.
Oh, with
there are
blue
some
dragon.
blue dragon system.
Okay, I'll have to
So,
look at that.
because we are using IE11 and Java on the date, 45, whatever. And if so, is it also the major versions, for example, Java 1.8 or IE11 with subversions and higher? Or do you have some constraints that says, okay, not higher than this and not higher than this?
So with IE 11, I don't think that there's a constraint, and I want to say, I have to look at it, but I want to say with the Java version IE or Java 1.8, I think we have and up listed on the software, but it's difficult sometimes with Java because they've made changes in the past with some of their minor updates that really affected the route builder negatively because of some libraries. So we have drawn a line in the sand, and I would be surprised if we said and up, because a lot of the times we find a version up to a version that works and we just say, all right, this is where we're drawing a line right now. So I'll double check on the documentation, but most of the time we say, for Java especially, we'll say up to here, and then that's it. But that can be difficult right now, since I know Java 1.7 is going out of support. So, yes?
We now have a Citrix environment. So we're running a very controlled layers and everything. With this new version, can it be independent of Citrix in a way that it will always be compatible with the same Microsoft environment?
Should be. Because it's a thin client over either Internet Explorer, Firefox, or Chrome, or I think those are the three major ones that we support right now. We shouldn't necessarily have to run it over a Citrix environment in order to be compatible, depending on what other programs you're running on the client side.
Well, the point is that we don't have that control on the client side on the versions. So
That's true. That's true. Now and we do run into sometimes with like IE compatibility mode, and where we run into some issues. I wouldn't say issues per se as much as I would say sometimes that can cause views to be a little skewed, especially on like some forms and things like that. So there's things like that that I guess we're working towards making sure that those are available and that they'll always work outside of, say, a Citrix environment. But sometimes it depends on pieces of the client. We do have in the hardware software recommendations a client checklist, I guess you could say, or recommendation for software, third-party software like browsers and versions of Office and things like that. But so guarantee no, but recommendations yes.
Just another question about the conversions to PDF from the publishing server. Would that be about independent also on the Office versions, or?
Yeah, it would. It is dependent on the version of Office. Interestingly, in the hardware software recommendations, it does specify a 32-bit version of Office on the PDF, and then we recommend 2013, Office 2013, right now. Obviously, when the next version comes out, we'll be testing that as well. Historically, AdLib has been the long pole in the tent, if you will, on that one. They take a long time to get their software up to date if there's too many changes with Office and things like that. But that can, like, so for example, if you put a Visio document in there and don't have Visio publishing server, that can create problems because you don't have a way to convert it. But if you have also an older version of Office, sometimes that will create problems as well. So again, yes, it's still dependent on the version of Office on the PDF publishing server for the PDF conversion.
We're running Office 365 now.
So you should be okay. So that shouldn't be an issue.
From your technical expertise, which browser would you recommend on this side?
My technical?
Yeah.
I would say Firefox. And here's the two reasons why. Because with Firefox, you can do enough configuration that if you're using single sign-on or WIA, you can still use that with Firefox, and you can actually configure it to also use My Files if you're using My Files. Chrome, because My Files, I guess you could say, uses a security loophole in Internet Explorer that allows you to open up a directory directly. You can configure Firefox to do that, whereas Chrome just does not let you do that at all. So you can't use My Files with Chrome because of the Chrome limitation, whereas Firefox you can configure to allow that if you want. Same thing with single sign-on on Firefox. So even though Firefox is a little heavier than, say, Chrome, that's what I recommend. It's what I use when I run Mac. So, but I don't use My Files. It's just you draw that line in the sand where you're like, I'm going to use My Files or not. I just said, I'm just not, ever. So anyway, that's just my personal preference. Other questions? Comments? Last chance. Jokes? 7-Eleven jokes? Definitely not. Okay.
I will Windows 10.
Are we ready for Windows 10? That's an excellent question. I don't know. I'll find out. I would say probably not yet. I imagine, so normally what we do is our testers are pretty good about getting the pre-release of things and doing some high-level testing to see if there's anything that's just not going to work. So far, I haven't heard anything that says, hey, by the way, tell your customers not to upgrade to Windows 10 because it's just going to blow everything up. Luckily, because we use a browser for most everything that we do, it's pretty low risk. But we haven't officially validated it yet. So. Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming, and if you have any specific questions, let me know. If I don't know, I will find the answer for you. I've got the list already, so that done. Thank you all.